PJ. We connected over LinkedIn and we had a chat a couple months ago. But the purpose of today is just to get to know each other, figure out what you're doing in sexuality, and you're across the pond from us. So it'll be really interesting for me and hopefully for people who are listening to this to kind of understand what sexuality education looks like, not in the US, and how we're doing things differently, how we're doing the same, and what we can learn from you, because boy, we need it here in the US. So if you don't mind just introducing yourself, tell me your name, your pronouns, anything else you think kind of basic right off the start.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. My name is PJ. It stands for Peter Jane, but I prefer PJ. It's a lot easier to remember. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the founder of Rephrase, which is an organisation that provides healthy relationships and sex education without the awkwardness, and I love it. The organisation exists to help empower young people to be critical thinkers, make informed choices, and develop healthy relationship behaviours.
Yes, and we are going to get into Rephrase in a kind of later in our journey here today, but I'm excited to learn more about Rephrase and kind of get into that health educator side of sexuality that we don't necessarily talk as much about here. So tell me a little bit about your why, your purpose, your passion, and you work in sexuality education, but that might not necessarily be your why, and it might be. So tell me what that is and how sexuality education is kind of incorporated into that.
So my why is kind of summed up in my vision statement. So it is basically to equip young people with the knowledge, attitudes, and skills that will empower them to develop healthy, respectful relationships. So a few years ago, I kind of was thinking, I thought there are so many different kinds of poverty in society, including relational poverty. And young people are often over-entertained or underwhelmed, overindulged yet unfulfilled, always looking for that next thing, but never fully satisfied. So for me, effective RSE is about helping young people to be happy and confident and safe when it comes to their approach to relationships and sex now and for the rest of their lives. So this kind of links in. So I do basically very down-to-earth interactive workshops and presentations, and that is what we use to provide a safe, non-judgmental space to ask questions, talk about this stuff. So that is my why. It's really about empowering young people, giving them the knowledge so they're informed, so they can make their choices, which are right for them and their relationship, but they've actually got the information. I kind of feel that we need to go beyond simply teaching about risks, reproduction and disease, because there is so much more involved when it comes to sexual well-being and building and maintaining healthy relationships. So you could say it's about safeguarding. The bottom line is about safeguarding. So I want young people to be physically and emotionally safe when it comes to their experiences of sex and relationships, not only impacting them, but also future generations. If they've got the information, they can pass it on. So actually you end up impacting society as a whole. And I kind of think healthy relationships are the backbone of a functioning society.
Yeah, so tell me about this word relational poverty. I'm in the literature, but I don't think I've ever heard this word. So tell me a little bit about how, if this is something you created, if it's something you heard, and it seems to be really kind of central to your mission and your why and your purpose. So tell me a little bit about why that sticks out to you and how that word kind of came to be in your vocabulary.
I just heard it once on a radio, really random context. And it was like a light bulb. And I thought that sums up what I see when I work with young people and adults, to be fair. So it's really about just recognizing that we are not born with a toolkit. We don't have an instruction manual. So, people talk about healthy relationships and great communication skills, and yet we don't know. Unless we're taught this stuff, we don't know. So how can we possibly bring that into our own relationships, but also how can we then teach future generations? So, I kind of feel relational poverty summed up my sort of aspect of what I'm really passionate about in my field of work.
And when you think about the relationships that young people are lacking most, or the ability to curate those relationships, is that with their peers? Is that with their parents? Is that with older adults? Or is that just kind of in general, that lack of ability to really form and cultivate relationships with other people in general?
From my experience, and because I'm working in this field, it is often between peer and peer. So it's that kind of like, how do you communicate what you want? So thinking about consent, how do you do that verbally, but also non-verbally? Right. And how do you read those signs? So it is very much about that kind of encouraging and empowering them to know that themselves and feel strong enough to say what they like or don't like, and linking that right back again to healthy relationships. because ultimately a healthy relationship is going to involve consent, respect, good communication, all these things. So it's kind of a big package, really.
Yeah, and I think we often think about the separation between platonic and romantic relationships, but really friendships ultimately at some point probably turn into romantic relationships, right? And so, learning how to communicate in general is then helpful for when you're in a romantic relationship because it all starts, kind of at that bottom level. So I think you're right. And we don't get that in any other kind of class, right? You're supposed to learn that throughout school, just kind of casually. But I think it's so awesome that you're really kind of putting that into perspective and at the forefront of, we're going to learn a lot of other stuff, but, kind of at the core, learning how to talk to each other, learning how to express your needs, how to set boundaries, how to conflict manage when you don't like something or when somebody does something you don't appreciate or they clearly violate your consent. What do you do? And I'm just we're going to talk more about it, but I'm excited to learn about what students in the UK and how they differ. So tell me a little bit about your experience in sexuality education and what you've come to know as kind of common misconceptions, either about what you do, about who we are as sexuality educators, or like sexuality education field in general. What are myths? What are misconceptions? What do people think about us that's necessarily not true?
It's a great question. In a way, it's quite potentially toxic at times because of people's personal baggage. I think sometimes there's resistance about teaching this subject because it comes from a place of fear, and that fear is about the fact that if you talk about the topic, then it's the same as condoning it. But actually, if I ever hear that, I tend to take the person right back and say this is about safeguarding. So we focus on the safeguarding element of a young person being physically and emotionally safe. It's about helping them identify, name, and call out toxic behavior, those red flag behaviors. And it's about well-being and empowering young people with knowledge, skills, and attitudes that will enable them to have healthy relationships as they move through into their adult life. And when I've kind of gone from that angle, a lot of the time people kind of go, oh, okay, get it, So I think it kind of alleviates their fears a little bit. But it's a really emotive subject because we've all got different experiences, whether that's culture, religion, family, school education. So it is a sensitive subject, definitely.
And I think a lot of the misconception is around the fact that we are trying to educate and or influence the young people that we serve to believe what we believe, right? And I think you and I both know that that's just absolutely not true, right? We have our own beliefs, but nothing that I say is what I'm trying to get this young person to do, right? I'm simply trying to give them information, knowledge, attitude, skills that they can then help them make their own decisions. And so maybe some of the misconception comes from just not knowing what we do. And so I don't know if we need to do a better job of just discussing and having open conversations with maybe parents. And we talked about this a little bit and, getting more parents and older adults and those with maybe a little bit more influence of younger people to say, like, this is really important. Like, you know, Miss PJ said this, and that's really awesome. We don't believe that in our family, or, in our family, this is really important. So tell me a little bit about how you kind of interact with parents and what you do when maybe they don't agree with what you're teaching.
I love working with parents because often when we've gone through the workshop, you see them kind of just relax, their shoulders lower. And all I do is it's very much about being impartial. So like you said, you can have your own beliefs and thoughts. Absolutely, we all will because we're all different human beings. But what I'm really passionate about is empowering those parents to be able to have the communication skills and those tips to know how to start those conversations with their young people. And it's almost a bit like taking them on that journey as it is being in the classroom, because for some people, parents, they haven't had this kind of conversation before. If you've got potentially generations of people who haven't talked about it because they've not felt confident or they haven't wanted to, they're raising children then who don't have the skill or the terminology or information. So it kind of just repeats this cycle. So I like breaking that and actually saying, you don't need to be a sexpert. It's absolutely fine to not have all the answers. This is about you being a safe space for your young person to know they can talk to you and come to you with a little thing, because if they do that, they're more likely to come to you with big things.
Yeah, and I think it helps that I think as we get further in this field, we get more and more information and learning how to work with populations of different sizes and ages and groups and ethnicities and cultures. And so I'm not a parent and I don't know what it's like to be a parent. I'm not sure if you're a parent or not, but I think it's just it's really awesome that you are able to work with different groups and different ages, because you're right. A lot of these parents unfortunately never got sexuality education, and we could talk about why that is, right? But just the fact. So how do you get to these parents? Is it you, teaching teens and then inviting their parents? Is it specifically for parents, or how does that kind of work?
So it's either been sort of one-to-one parent support, or it's usually, so recently I was in Croydon in London, and that was through a church who had a group of parents. So they wanted sessions delivered to their youth group, and they also wanted sessions on the next day delivered to the parents. So, that was just a big group of parents who just wanted to learn and wanted to be able to help their children. So it was brilliant. It was just, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter about where you're coming from. This is about you wanting to do the best for your child, whatever that looks like. And all I do is kind of help them get to a place where they're more comfortable talking about this subject.
Yeah, and I'm so baffled that it's in a church. We have a hard time here in the U.S., I think, allowing sexuality education and the word sex in general into religious spaces. Is that pretty common, or was
No,
that
it's
kind of
not.
a
No,
no? That was
we
a
have, yeah, we have similar challenges, but fortunately, in that example, the leadership team are really positive, really proactive, and preventative. They can see the importance of educating young people, because if we don't have these conversations, we need to ask ourselves, whether you're a parent or not, we need to ask ourselves, if we're not giving them this information, then who is? And
yeah.
I have to say, often it's pornography. Or it's their peers. So it's actually misinformation, it's distorted, it's frightening, and actually it sets a whole different story about what relationships or bodies should look like, or
Right.
how you should behave in relationships. So that's why I love taking the awkwardness out of sex education and just allowing people to talk, think, and just explore the topic safely.
Yeah, and again, I kind of think about almost not using the word sexuality education, as simple and as bland as it is, right? I think it's very frightening for some people. And so I think maybe we've talked about this, but using something more like healthy relationships, or navigating conversations, or a lot of what we do is help people understand each other, learn how to talk to each other, right? So that's wonderful to hear. So, talk to me a little bit about your educational history and, how you kind of found sexuality education as kind of your passion and your why. Was it formal education? Was it, you know, through, wherever you were and you just realized this was on your heart? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, this is a weird one. So, when I was 14 years old, I just had a real passion for healthy relationships.
Mhm.
And at that point, I thought, I want to be a sexual therapist. That's what I had in my head.
Yeah.
So I remember telling my school, it was a Catholic school at the time, and we had one remaining nun still teaching. So you can imagine their shock when I announced what I wanted to do for a job. Um, and I remember one parents' evening in particular, when the teacher sitting opposite us, my parents and I, sort of leant over and whispered quietly and said, "You do realise your daughter wants to be a..." And my parents said, "Yeah, it's great, isn't it?" So from a really young age, there was something in me that was just passionate about that subject. And it wasn't until I started working with teens in secondary school that it was a light bulb moment. And I sort of switched thinking, rather than work in the field of therapy further down the line when things might have already begun to break down, perhaps, actually, if we invest in teens, give them the tools, we are really being proactive. And that was so exciting. So I did various different jobs, nothing to do with that, whilst I was raising our children. And then 4 years ago, I did a psychology degree in the meantime, but not specifically to do with this. And then I found it was a university accredited qualification run by an organisation in London, which was all about teaching relationships and sex education. So that was my next step. And then since then, I've done various training, which I view as CPD, continued professional development. So I just make sure I keep on top of that. But yeah, so just it's been a long journey, and I'm now living the dream.
I know you're where so many of us want to be. And I think it's so cool that from a young age you really knew, and maybe you didn't. I think a lot of young people, and this is what I try to tell young people, is that there's so many different jobs. And even within sexuality education, right? Some folks focus on trauma and violence, some folks focus on pleasure, some folks focus on healthy relationships. And then it really is so versatile. So, talk to me a little about your own sexuality education. I know you talked about your parents being really open and letting you kind of go into that, but how did you come to find out about a lot of this information? Was it on your own? Did you learn through porn? Was it through movies or through school?
It was a little bit, I mean, my parents were really supportive, but we still had values. It wasn't as if they were just kind of, open to me seeing or reading anything at all. We had values. So we were raised very much about valuing relationships and valuing sex actually as well, and valuing ourselves. So I kind of had that anyway in my mind. And then it was just a bit of school education, which wasn't huge, I have to say. And then I guess just studying, learning, because I'm really interested and passionate about it. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of it self-motivated in terms of where, I've seen information, and doing the Open College Network training. That was really great because we were then exposed to various resources that we are then licensed to use as part of being qualified. So yeah, it's just been a varied journey, really.
Yeah, it sounds like like you said, you kind of got it from a lot of different resources. And I
Yeah.
think like the people we serve, that's pretty much their experience too, unless they're lucky enough to have you or me or somebody where they get a course, right? They're kind of free for all unless their parents are doing it. So talk to me a little bit about the sexuality education you provide outside of Rephrase, if there was any. I want to say Rephrase because I'm excited about it. But any sex ed you've done before Rephrase, and kind of any comments you have or thoughts you have about providing sexuality education in the context of the UK in particular. And I know you travel. I think you're on the southern west side, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Okay. So if you've traveled to other parts of the UK, what is that like? We'll start there.
So I'm trying not to give too much away about Rephrase, but it's quite difficult. So before Rephrase was born, I was working within a team that was focused on neurodiversity, and these were with young people not in mainstream education.
Okay.
And I was one of the sort of tutors effectively. So they might have maths and English, or they do outdoor education. And so I was just part of that kind of bigger team. And that was fine. But I found over the couple of years, it was quite restrictive as to what I could do, because obviously there were various triggers, and some of them were, selective mute, and there was a lot of anxiety. So it was really difficult to kind of pass on all the information and have those conversations.
Sure.
So I did that for a couple of years. But during that time, that is when I was really getting itchy feet and thinking this stuff needs to be available to any organisation that works with young people. So I will stop there before I go into Rephrase. But yes, you're right, I do travel around. So a couple of months ago, I ended up in London, Hampshire, Wiltshire, and up north in Hull. So for different groups, whether that's youth groups or schools. And they are, it depends whether it's a workshop or a presentation. So sometimes it is workshops, which is a smaller class size group. Other times a presentation to hundreds of students. Try and make it interactive as much as I can, but depends on really what's needed. I can't say much more without giving too much away about Rephrase.
I know. And tell me how kind of those jobs led you into thinking about a new position. I know we can kind of bring into Rephrase, but tell me, what were you looking for, something different? I know you were working with, communities that were disabled, and maybe that presented some challenges. So tell me what you were looking for differently, what you sought out, and about your current, what Rephrase is and what it's all about.
So I think through that experience, it was really valuable. But I realised there was so much more that I could be offering. And I think being within that environment was always going to be there'd be certain boundaries, and that would be it. So it was kind of like stay there and stay within those boundaries, or launch independently and then be able to work with all sorts of different organisations. And I never imagined to be running my own business. I was never one of those people that thought I'm going to have my own business when I'm a grown up. It's just kind of, I think it was driven by the passion. I just thought this is too important not to do. So took the plunge, and then Rephrase was born.
Yeah. So tell me what Rephrase is, what it's about, what you do, the groups that you serve, and what's your favorite part about it?
So I established this venture following a long-held passion, as you know, from the age of 14, that every young person deserves access to good quality relationships and sex education. My passion is to equip young people with the knowledge and skills to build and maintain healthy relationships. So this led me to become an accredited relationships and sex educator. And now I facilitate exploration of these topics in a variety of settings. So currently, Rephrase supports and works with state schools and independent schools, parents, teachers, youth groups, community charity groups, the YMCA, pregnancy centres, Devon and Cornwall Police, and domestic abuse survivors. The thing I absolutely love about it is the fact that I am taking the awkwardness out of a topic which most people find fairly horrific to talk about. And I'm known as the paracetamol to your pain. because, you know, for many, it's just not something they want to have to deal with. But this is so important. I also love being free to work with a variety of organisations. So I'm always offering bespoke sessions because I really want to meet the needs of that organisation. So I'd always have that conversation, see what they're trying to achieve, and then, you know, build the workshops around that. I love seeing parents and staff feel more relaxed and empowered to support their young people. Literally, physically, as I've said, seeing their shoulders just lower as they kind of breathe. And knowing that by creating safe spaces for open, honest conversations, young people are able to make safer, more informed decisions when it comes to their own experiences of sex and relationships, which is just incredible and valuable. And then hearing from students themselves about how the workshops have positively impacted them is priceless. You know, you just can't put a price on it.
I think you're right. We go into this on a mission and we have an idea, but I think it's really about who we're serving and their outcomes and their happiness and their healthiness that really kind of keeps me going too.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about this awkwardness. So how do you kind of, I don't want to give away your whole business model, but tell me maybe some examples or one example of, how you really try to make the topics less awkward.
I think I start very much, it's really difficult to explain because I think it's just me, it's just part of who I am. So when I talk about the subject, there is no awkwardness or embarrassment, and I think that straight away gives permission to the young people I'm with to go, oh, okay, we can say this now in front of her, or we can ask this question. And I'm not really shockable. So to be honest, a lot of the things I get asked are similar sorts of questions. So, and my feeling is if kids have got questions, they're looking for answers, aren't they? So actually, it's our duty to give them the information they're looking for. I'd rather that than them, look it up somewhere online and get some really weird response. But yeah, so I think awkwardness is very much about you in terms of who's delivering or talking about the subject to just be as relaxed and chilled. When it comes to body parts, we talk about arms or legs or feet, the same principle with the vulva. And I always remind them that the vulva is not a car, because sometimes they think I'm talking about a Volvo. But even just talking about the body parts in such a normal way, it's mundane, they kind of go, oh, okay, and by then they're already going, oh, this is all right. And we laugh because actually it is funny sometimes, and it's good to laugh, but just not laugh at each other. So yeah, it's just, and this is what I try and help parents understand. If you can be relaxed when you're talking to a young person, you are giving them permission to come to you to talk to you about all sorts of things, which is really important.
Well, and I think we kind of learned this before, that embarrassment is learned, right? So we learned that talking about your, saying penis, saying vagina is embarrassing. We've learned that it's silly, right? And so I don't know about in the UK, but here in the US and specifically, there's certain contexts where it's okay to talk about, and then there's a lot of contexts where it's not okay. And so then it becomes kind of this like undercover, you can't really talk about it, right? Making up names, cookie and flower, and all these other terms that are silly, but also just not right. What happens with abuse, and we could go into it, why it's so important to use anatomically correct terms, but you're right. And just normalizing talking about communication and your body parts and sexuality. And I think here we sexualize bodies of certain sort, right, for media, but then when we want to breastfeed, it's not okay. So I don't know. I really value that kind of just, it's a normal body part. Let's talk about it. And I get college students that have never had anatomy and don't know the difference between vulva and vagina. And that's not their fault, right? They've never had anybody tell them. And so I think it's really awesome that in high school, these students in middle school and whatever age you're working with them, that they're getting just the really, it's just normal, right? It's just another conversation. It's just another talk. It's not, there's
And
no, there's
it's
nothing embarrassing.
yeah, it's down to safeguarding, isn't it? I mean, like you said, the word cookie. There was a year 6 student who went into school and said to their teacher, "My uncle wants to eat my cookie," and the teacher said, "That's great. It's really good to share." So I always tell when I talk to parents and teachers, it's actually about saying pet names are fine in terms of family names for body parts, but they need to know the correct terminology.
Yeah.
And you need to know boundaries and what's good touch and what's bad touch, because otherwise, if they go to the GP about a health problem, or they are in a situation which is a safeguarding concern, they're not going to have the words to articulate what's actually going on. So it really is important.
Yeah. And I think we need to help our young people. And a lot of my research is in the healthcare side of sexual health. And so helping them be able to, like you say, have conversations, right? I'm bleeding, or I'm having, urination issues, or there are bumps on my penis, or whatever it might be. And so just normalizing those conversations, especially between parents and children. I think they may be more common peer to peer. But especially, I'm not sure, but my guess is that it might be more less common for those conversations using anatomically correct terms between parents and children. Would you agree?
Yeah, and that links back to the whole shame and taboo around the whole topic. Because if we've got pretend names for body parts, that immediately sends a message that it's not okay to talk about the actual name, and there's something wrong about that. Rather than just learning, it's just like a toe is a toe, and a nose is a nose, and ears are ears. It's the same thing. So it's really important from a young age just to educate young children about what their body parts are called.
And talk to me about pleasure. Is that something that's included within your curricula? It's starting to become a little bit more common, not really here in the US, but I think from the sexuality education standpoint, we want to include it, but from the state standards, we're not allowed to. So talk to me about what, maybe not in the, basically that it should be fun, it should be interesting, it should be exciting, right? That sexual activity is a good thing when it's consensual, when you're using safer sex methods and all of those things. So talk to me about if pleasure is included at
So
all.
it's not in the curriculum specifically, but I would suggest if anybody's got, like exactly as you've just explained, any educator who knows they're looking at the bigger picture is going to think about incorporating it within context of these sorts of workshops or lessons. And it's not about condoning it. So I think some people might panic and suggest, you're going to do all these different things. It's just about saying, actually, again, safeguarding. If something's happening sexually and it is not good, if your gut feeling is telling you something is wrong, if it's painful, all those things are ways your body's trying to keep you safe. And if someone grows up not knowing that it should be pleasurable for both people involved, then you're missing a big part of education. So it's certainly something to refer to, but you'd have to be quite careful about how you frame it, definitely. So I focus on the healthy relationship element, and that actually everyone's got the right and deserves to experience healthy relationships. And within those, you may have sexual intimacy, but you may not if you're asexual, in which case you might have romance, you might have intimacy, but not really have much of a sexual desire, and that's okay too. So it's kind of
Go ahead.
just looking at the bigger picture all the time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Relationships can be comprised of a lot of different elements, right? And there are folks who are asexual or just abstaining for the moment, right? Maybe they're in between casual partners, or maybe they're taking a break. And so I think you're right. Pleasure and it should feel good, right? Relationships should be not happy all the time, but there should be a lot of moments of happiness. And so I think that's a really good idea and kind of suggestion to really look at that bigger picture and thinking about safeguarding. I love that you keep going back to that, and that's really the purpose.
Yeah.
So I know you are an entrepreneur. You created this from kind of the ground up. So talk to me about maybe some of the challenges that you had creating it, or some that maybe you experience when you work with different groups, and any suggestions you have for folk who are maybe thinking about branching out as a contractor or creating their own business. What advice do you have?
So first of all, I'd say sex is a big topic involving values, attitudes, emotions, personal experiences. So actually all this can formulate into baggage, to some degree or another. It can shape us as humans. So the ability to talk about sex does relate to our own sex education experience, or it might be from our parents or our school, culture, religious belief. And therefore there is a nervousness about it, which can impact then people being willing to invest in their young people in this area. So some schools are amazing. They've got leads, PSHE leads, and they are passionate. They really get it. And some are not quite so passionate, or, because it's not a GCSE subject. So it might be that they do it in-house and it's a bit more of a tick box exercise. But, we know in terms of learning outcomes, if you've got an educator in the room who signed up to teach history or geology or French, and they're then having to talk about sex and body parts, their embarrassment and awkwardness will impact the learning of those in the classroom. So it kind of comes back to how much of a priority does each individual school or organisation place on this subject. And these are life skills at the end of the day. So it may not be a GCSE subject, but it is absolutely fundamental to helping develop young people who then become adults and are aware and they know they've got the knowledge they need.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah. We I think it's all about how you frame it, and all about how you can get people to kind of get on board with what you're doing. That's awesome. So, is there any area of sexuality in general that you are really interested in kind of learning more about? And how do you go about doing that? I know you said you do continuing education. So, is that how you do it, or do you kind of look at other
Yeah,
resources?
it may be a mixture of learning from webinars, going on other courses. I think keeping up to date with terminology
Mm,
is really quite interesting because it's changing all the time. And the details around sexual health and the progress in terms of contraception and potentially the male contraceptive being formed in possibly 5 years time and things like that. So it's just been trying to keep up to date with articles or whatever it is. I'm just always looking around. So but also legislation, in terms of sexual offences, just keeping up to date with that as well. It's just one of those fields. It feels like it's changing all the time. But then on the other hand, law haven't kept caught up with the diverse society we live in either. So there's a real kind of friction. There's a bit of a tension. But I'm trying. Yeah, I just try to keep abreast of it all as much as I can, basically.
Yeah, I heard. So I don't know if you've heard of Latinx as kind of a way as a gender neutral term for Latino or Hispanic people of Latino or Hispanic origin. So Latinx. But I've recently heard that Latine is now kind of the more gender neutral version that seems a lot more personal. But you're right. It is just constantly reading and hearing from peers, and I think asking our young people too. They help me kind of stay abreast to what's going on. And talk to me a little bit about the politics and kind of what's happening in the policy realm in the UK around sexuality education, if you don't mind. It's a
I know it's fine. So
lot
we are
going on
this year
here.
we are due a review. In 2023, we're due a review from the point when the curriculum came into
Mm,
being. They've brought it forward slightly. So we're just waiting to hear really what is going to be amended or changed. But when it first came in, it had cross political party support. So it was a really positive thing. So I'm hoping that whatever is changed, they're still going to not lose sight on the importance of it. And I mean, the reality is we've got something here called the Sex Education Forum,
okay.
and they've done research, and their research tells us that young people who receive effective relationships and sex education are more likely to seek help or speak out. They're less likely to be a victim or a perpetrator of sexual violence. They're more likely to practice safer sex and have improved health outcomes.
Mm,
They're more likely to have consented to first sex and for first sex to happen at an older age. And they're more likely to have an understanding of digital safety in regard to relationships and sex.
mm,
So that is, that's the bottom line. And they are really great at listening to young people's voices. So within the review of the RSE curriculum, again, I really hope that the decision makers take on board the importance of listening to the young people and what they want to learn. Because
mm.
they want the information, they're not kind of shrinking away, they want the information. So it's about how we do that consistently, because obviously everyone's different and perhaps how they teach. So yes, we'll wait and see what comes out this year.
Wonderful. So tell me, I don't think I'm familiar with here. Technically, it's required K5, 6, 8, and then 9 through 12 at some point. Tell me how it's structured, at least in the public system in the UK and where you are. Is it required? Do they do it by grade level? Is it by chunks? How does that kind of work?
So the first primary school, which would be our kind of when they start school around 5 up
Mhm.
to about 11 as
Mhm.
primary, they would have to do relationships education,
Okay.
not the sex bit, just the relationships.
Sure.
Then they do within science curriculum, they would then look at the biological anatomy, usually the internal reproductive
Mhm.
organ. So that's that bit. Then they'll learn about consent but non-consensual context. And then secondary school, year 7 up to 13, if there's a sixth form college attached.
Mhm.
So that's from kind of age 11, 12, right up to then 18. That's when they can bring in sex education as well as the relationship education.
Mm,
Parents do have the right to remove their children from those lessons
sure.
until 3 terms before the 16th birthday, at which point that child can then opt in themselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The US would never. Oh, that's awesome. So here in K5, it's the responsibility of our K through 5 teachers. So it's like you generally have one teacher K through 5. And so it's their responsibility to add in all of that. just doesn't get done a lot, not to the default of the teacher, but just there's just so much to teach. And like you said, we have things that are required. So that's really cool that kids 16 and older can decide whether they want to be in it or not. I think the US would fall apart if we tried to do that, but that's so wonderful. Um, so is there anything, I know we talked a little bit about kind of the changing of the policy. Is there any other kind of thing happening in the world relating to advocacy for sexuality education, or anything happening in your world that it's really close to your heart right now, that you're really passionate about, that you really feel very strongly about advocating for within sexuality education? And how do you go about doing that?
I am, as I've said, I'm passionate about healthy relationships. So I will run workshops around contraception and sexual health,
Yeah.
absolutely. But what I get asked most for are either things to do with self-esteem, body image,
Mhm.
linked to social media, healthy relationships, right through to abusive relationships, and the impact of porn on sex and relationships. So a lot of that, if you kind of group it, is around healthy relationships fundamentally. So, and that is the passion I have. It's about helping the young people recognize their worth and their value, and that doesn't change when someone says something to them or when someone does something to them. So it's really about empowering them to recognize the toxic behavior, and also giving them permission to love themselves enough to walk away when necessary, which is really hard when you are smitten in a relationship. But actually, I've literally seen people in these situations and their relationship is just eating them up, it's just destroying them. High anxiety, depression, not eating, not sleeping. So it's really about saying, actually, if you're emotionally or physically or psychologically being impacted negatively about the relationship you're in or from it, then you need to love yourself enough to walk away. And I link that then into kind of the importance of the 3 C's. So communication, consent, and contraception. Without communication, you can't have consent, you can't talk about it, you can't give it, you can't check in.
Yeah.
Consent needs to be mutual, and it can be obviously verbal or non-verbal. And if you don't have the communication, you can't really discuss contraception, not just preventing pregnancy, but also STI protection. 2 different elements, because sometimes girls say to me, "Oh, I'm on the pill, it's fine," and I kind of then go, "But what are you doing about STI protection?" And it's a whole different kind of thought process. So I always try and make them remember those 3 C's, because actually if they think about that, hopefully there'll be little triggers and prompts, before emotions get involved, before they're having to make those decisions last minute. It's actually saying, what am I going to do to plan for myself and my partner be safer if I'm going to be sexually active?
Listening to your voice, I was like, this is what I needed when I was 16. I just know that you bring so much life and so much calmness to a space that I'm so jealous that all
Oh.
these young teenagers get to have you, because I did not. We had somebody, but I don't. My mom and dad were great, but I'm so jealous. Oh, I think you're so right. And you should coin the 3 C's if you haven't already. um,
Yeah, it's just an easy way of remembering it, I think.
yeah, sure. And I think you're right. It comes down to communication. And we really don't get any information on healthy relationships unless it's from your family. And so it's so great that they get to have kind of this targeted time to really sit down and think about, what do I want in a relationship? What do I not want? And
Yeah,
self-worth. And like you said, self-efficacy is so crucial to that, right? And knowing what your values are and what you're willing to put up with, and where the kind of, red flag, yellow flag, green flag are, and what happens when you get to a red flag and you've decided that you need to walk away, and how do you do that safely? And how do you mitigate if there's violence of some sort? And so it's just so crucial. It's so great that you've kind of
yeah.
found that niche that you love, but is also so needed for our young people.
Yeah, and that links to the whole aspirational approach. So again, if you're, with young people, rather, I think they sometimes expect you to go, do this, do that, don't do this, and that is kind of that lecture style. But I always try and look at it from an aspirational approach. What do you want in
Mm,
your ideal relationship? What does that look like for you?
right.
Because all you're doing then is saying you've got an open forum to actually stop and think, what qualities do I want in my relationship? So there are fundamentally key qualities which are healthy qualities to have in a relationship, but that relationship will look different for everyone. So it's giving them that space to think, because often, we all kind of get on with life, don't we? When we don't stop and think. And then you can kind of snowball into the next thing. I find you in a relationship where maybe it's not as good as you thought it was, but you don't quite know how to deal with it or get out. And your gut feeling is there telling you something's not right, but you're kind of trying to ignore it. And, so it's about, again, preventative. If we can take the time to say to them, what are you looking for? What do you really value? Do you want your partner? Do you want your partner to get on well with your family? Is family really important to you? Do you want them to be a great communicator? Do you want them to be real behind closed doors and the same when you're, in public? And all these things are important, but they'll have a different priority for different people. So yeah, absolutely, it's just so important to be aspirational rather than kind of telling them what you think they should think, basically.
And I agree. I think we need to give our young people more autonomy over their decisions and their life's choices, right? And, I think we obviously 18 or 19 here in the US is a legal adult, but well before then, they're making decisions about how they're using their body, who they're dating, what they're eating, whether they're wearing a seatbelt. And so, but we don't trust them to make their own decisions when it comes to the partners that they want to have. And so I think it's so right establishing and even having the option to figure out what their values are is so important because I think for many young people, they don't. It's,
Yeah,
given by their parents or lack of, and they don't think they deserve values and beliefs and values. And so, what other people, they're so influenced by other people and their partners. And so, just having that autonomy
yeah,
and support above that of that autonomy to be able to make those decisions. And sometimes it doesn't work out, right? They say they want a partner that does this and it is bad, right? Not physically or abusive, but just doesn't work out. And that's okay, right? But they made that decision and it didn't work out. And now they can figure out what they like instead.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
crucial.
If you know what you're looking for, it'll be much easier to spot those red flags ahead of time. But also, it helps you protect your boundaries, your expectations, and your values. If you know what you really want in here and in here, then you're much more likely to be able to go, actually, no, thanks, you're all right, rather than kind of falling into the trap of potentially just trying lots of different relationships. Some people may choose to, that's fine too, but it's about trying to prevent that harm that's not necessary, that just be more certain about who you are and what you want and what you value. So I said before, from a young age, I knew that I valued relationships and I valued sex. It was something that was precious rather than something that wasn't in my mind. And that will be different for other people's views. But all these things sexuality is just one part of who we are as a human.
Yeah.
So, people I think they get hung up on it as being a big thing, but actually it's just one little bit of who we are. It doesn't, if you're not, like, if you're asexual, it doesn't mean you're broken. You can still experience intimacy and romance. So it's just that kind of, it's a little bit, and it's about how we explore to find ourselves as we grow older. What do we think about things? Same with politics, same with our friendships. We just grow and learn, don't we, what we like and what we don't like. And it's like that with relationships. What are we looking for in our ideal relationship?
And I think, like you said, kind of allowing yourself to have those boundaries and being able to set them and stick to them and, what to do when people cross those boundaries is so big. I didn't know this. And I think a lot of other people my age were also not taught a lot about that. And so I think it's so crucial for young people to know what they're okay and not okay with. I'm so excited. And I know that when they come to they leave your sessions, they're just so much better equipped, whether maybe not in the moment, but a day after, a week after, when they get into that relationship, that they say, oh, well, I remember Miss PJ told me that I needed to think about this. Right. And I'm not okay if they talk to somebody else or whatever it might be. I wish it could be in every school across the US and the UK because it's so important.
Yeah.
So tell me what advice you have for other sexuality educators or healthy relationships educators as they kind of grow into this space and grow as a kind of a sexuality educator or health educator in general.
So I would say, first of all, never forget your why. Think about what drives you. Remember why you love what you do and use it to fuel your actions, because you'll need that on down days. Not every day is going to be great, and it's hard work sometimes. And it's quite sad sometimes, things you hear, stories from young people. So it's remembering the why and clinging on to those moments where, I had a quote from it was a 14-year-old, it was an anonymous quote. And we've been talking about gaslighting and abusive behaviours. And this person wrote as feedback, said, I won't let him treat me in an unhealthy way anymore. And I thought that is so significant. I got goosebumps in that moment because that 14-year-old has now spotted what's going on, named it, going to call it out. Now, the other end of the spectrum, when I work with domestic abuse survivors, they tell me they just didn't know this stuff. So that 14-year-old, hopefully, I'm now not going to see in 10 years' time in my session because they know enough, and that's so powerful. So never forget your why. I'd also recommend you see the person in front of you, not their gender or sexuality. So I always maintain everyone deserves and has the right to receive RSE and be informed about sexual health. It's just like mental health, dental health, physical health. It's just another way of looking after ourselves and our well-being. And as I said before, from the Sex Ed Forum, there's so much evidence that tells us actually this stuff's really important. So the more we can do this well, the more chance we've got of helping young people have safe experiences of relationships.
I can just imagine you getting that feedback from that 14-year-old person and what that must feel like to be making such an impact. And I think you're right. A lot of people to grow up in homes where healthy relationships are not taught and their families don't exhibit healthy relationships. And if they're not being taught by their families, they're either going to porn or they're going to their friends, and it's clear that they're not getting the right information. So I think, like you said, that and the education from the forum just goes to prove that it's important, right? You don't get tested on it, but you get tested in life, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be a test, but it will be when you get married or when you get divorced or when there's violence or something like that. And so, it's so fun. How do we get our politicians and our government officials to back us? And, I wish everybody could.
The way to focus, I think, is just literally focusing on every single individual who you positively impact. Because when you look at the big scale of it all, it's so overwhelming that you could just go, do you know what? It's just too much. I'm going to walk away. I can't.
Yeah.
So if you focus on literally every single person, you sow those seeds and you give them information. You don't know what will happen in the future, but you know you've made a difference to them in some way. And I think that's what you have to hang on to.
Yeah, I like to say you can't change the world, but you can change one person's world. Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to come take your class. That's what I've decided. I gotta come to London and sign up for something. I don't know. Well, how can people get in contact with Rephrase if they're in the UK or they're in, they're if they want to sign up for a lesson with you? How do they do that? If we're across the pond and we want to seek you out on social media, what's the best way to get in contact?
So if you go to www.rephrasesw, that's for southwest.co.uk, that's the website. And on the website are all the different social media handles that you can just click on and contact me in different ways.
Perfect. I will put that up for our listeners so they can check it out. And I wish you all the best. I know you're going to do amazing things. I hope you get to.
Thank you so much for having me.
Interact with more communities and families. And I know that you'll do amazing things. Thank you so much.
Thank you.